I was to walk up to somebody on the streets of Immeryn and say, Crix is coming, they would immediately know what I was talking about, and they'd probably start to freak out. If I went up to somebody and said, there's Cephalyx in the sewers, there's a very good chance they're just going to stare at me kind of dumbfounded and be like, well, what is this crazy person talking about?
The Cephalyx are a really mysterious boogeyman from below the surface of Cain. They're kind of horrific in their alien mystique. They have these mental powers which can basically, tear another person's mind apart. They can drive people insane with just thoughts.
They abduct bodies and perform their experiments, and they protect themselves with these power-fueled rage beings that are mind-controlled and fight with crazy surgical tools and implements.
Blades, syringes, bone saws, cleavers, rotating saw blades, and all types of nasty kind of mangling gear.
Their culture relies very heavily on that continual influx of slaves. They are themselves somewhat fragile, much more cerebral creatures, and so they want to accumulate basically cannon fodder through these drudges that they assemble, as well as the monstrosities.
Once you're under the control of a Cephalyx, you're no longer an individual. That's why everything in the Cephalyx factions completely has the head covering, right? All the monstrosities, all the drudges. You are no longer yourself once you are taken under their mind control.
The Cephalyx are very nefarious. No one in the land of Immeryn wants to be enslaved by them, much less turned into this mindless, surgically altered monstrosity. So they're really something that is the thing of nightmares.
The playstyle of Cephalyx is very Machiavellian. It's very manipulative, as suits the faction. You're going to set down your army, which is composed of typically less elite troops, a lot of drudges, heavy hitters, guys that can take punishment, and then you're going to use all of the myriad abilities of mind control, influence, to maneuver your opponent in ways that completely hose them and benefit you.
You'll want to keep your various Cephalyx models interspersed throughout the battlefield. They'll keep your forces stronger, they'll keep themselves safer, because they'll have more meat shields to take incoming fire and that sort of thing. A lot of different Cephalyx models have sacrificial pawn abilities to sacrifice either drudges or monstrosities.
There's a new Cephalyx solo called the Agitator, who has an amazing ability that gives +2 to attack and damage rolls for all Cephalyx within a certain range of him.
I'm a big fan of the Cephalyx Mindbender and Drudge unit because the drudges in this case have sort of an optic port, and they serve as what is essentially an arc node for the unit leader. And he's got offensive spells, he's got augmentation spells that he can use on other drudges, not just the ones in his unit, but the power that he channels through these poor drudge slaves is so intense that it essentially destroys their mind in the process and basically kills that model within the unit.
The Dominator is probably my favorite Cephalyx model that we made for the sub-faction because he's just so perfect and iconic of the whole nature of the faction. This guy's a UA that attaches to any small or medium-based mercenary unit. So your Boomhowler and Co., your Alexi and Risen, your Horgenhold Forge Guard, all these guys can literally have the hooks of the Cephalyx in them.
While he's around, they're a much better unit, but when he falls, they suddenly begin to flee.
The monstrosities function in many respects similar to a warjack in terms of their mental functioning. Even though a monstrosity is composed of living tissue, they're very much sort of a fabricated creature, one whose mind has been specifically altered and simplified to almost act more like a cortex. Both warjacks and monstrosities don't have any self-will. They don't ever make decisions or decide to do things. They act purely on the orders or behest of their masters. And so there's a strong thematic similarity, even though one is flesh and the other is a machine.
There are a number of differences between a monstrosity and a warjack. For one, they're living models rather than constructs, so that will affect some of the things that will be able to impact them in the game. They also don't have a cortex, but instead have a brain system, so certain other abilities like cortex damage won't affect them. Lastly, they're not actually warjacks. Monstrosities are their own category, so spells and abilities that affect warjacks specifically will not affect a monstrosity.
Monstrosities are designed by the Cephalyx to be these hulking masses of flesh that can just take abuse non-stop. And that's represented on the tabletop by a low defense and a pretty low arm for a heavy warjack. But their damage goods are off the chart huge. They have all 36 boxes, just like the Behemoth.
I don't imagine that there's any reaction to feeling pain. You know, you hack off one of its limbs and it just keeps going until you put it down entirely.
One of the other things to note about the monstrosities is that they have fairly aggressive costs. None of them cost more than 7 points apiece, which for a heavy warjack or war beast is definitely a very low cost.
So the subduer uses a net launcher to pull in its victims and then stab them up close, whereas the wrecker is sort of this whirlwind of destruction, swinging 2 wrecking balls off its fists. And then finally the warden is this large, intimidating guy who hangs out by the warcaster, and if anyone gets too close, rams them with his head and knocks them across the field.
Exelonthexus is the first Cephalyx warcaster, and this guy has powerful psychic capabilities.
He's got a great focus stat of 8, which really allows him to exert his control over the board. He can turn his monstrosities into arc nodes, and then he's got great spells like telekinesis, as well as a feat that allows him to totally manipulate the opponent's models on the board and put them into positions where they're either at a disadvantage or is advantageous to himself.
He's also very good at taking care of his monstrosities, psychically healing them and empowering them to fight on. He can also force his enemies to either go crazy or start killing each other. So he's got a lot of tools at his disposal that reflect how the psychic powers of the Cephalyx can control the minds and bodies of others.
Visually, we definitely wanted to communicate that Exelonthexus is the brain in control, not the brawn. He uses his monstrosities for that, right? He manipulates things for that. So we really wanted to showcase the larger head and the power of his mind versus the frailty of his body.
I was really enjoying the idea of having, the warcaster looming in the background with his mastermind plot, while all of these giant monstrosities and drudges trudge across the field, inflicting murder on my enemies.
In the end, what's the greatest threat that the Cephalyx pose to the Iron Kingdoms? Well, I think that threat has to be uncertainty. Uncertainty of their motivations, uncertainty of what their actions are going to cause for the rest of the political nature of the Iron Kingdoms in their times of turmoil and war.
They have no concern for human life at all. And so regardless of what their goals are, just the process of enslavement, their callousness toward human life makes them a significant threat.
The idea that there's this unknowable but very unspeakable evil that's just lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike, and you never know quite what the goals are, makes it more sinister than I think anything that we've done before.